The morning light filtered through the kitchen windows of Hartfield Manor with cruel indifference, illuminating the worn fabric of Clara Ashford's dress as she scrubbed the copper pots with reddened hands. 10 years had passed since her mother's death, 2 since her father's, and in those 2 years, Clara had descended from cherished daughter to something less than a servant in her own ancestral home. "Clara, where is that wretched girl?" Lady Constance's shrill voice echoed through the corridors, each syllable sharp as broken glass. Clara straightened, pressing her palm against the small of her aching back. She was 23, though she felt decades older. The mirror in her sparse attic room, the only looking-glass she was permitted, showed a face she barely recognized. Gaunt cheeks, shadows beneath green eyes that had once sparkled with her father's joy, hair pulled back in a severe knot that her stepmother insisted upon. "Beauty is wasted on those who have nothing else to offer," Lady Constance had said, the day she'd taken Clara's gowns and replaced them with these shapeless gray rags. "I am here, Lady Constance." Clara emerged into the corridor, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Dignity, her father had once told her, was the one thing no one could steal unless you surrendered it freely. Her stepmother descended the stairs like a galleon in full sail, all rustling silk and quivering feathers. Behind her trailed Lavinia and Dorothea, Clara's stepsisters, dressed in the latest London fashions. Fashions purchased, Clara knew, with funds from her own inheritance. The injustice of it burned like acid in her throat, but she had learned long ago that protest only invited greater cruelty. The silver needs polishing. Lord Ashford's study requires dusting. And for heaven's sake, keep yourself out of sight. We are expecting callers today, important callers, and I will not have you embarrassing this family with your presence. Lady Constance's eyes, hard as agate, swept over Clara with unconcealed disdain. "You should be grateful I allow you to remain under this roof at all." My roof, Clara thought, but did not say. My home, my inheritance, which you control until I reach 25, still 2 years away. 2 years that stretched before her like an eternity. She curtsied, the gesture automatic, and retreated toward the library. Mrs. Holloway, the elderly governess who had served Clara's mother, passed her in the hallway and pressed a warm roll into her hand. Breakfast, stolen from a kitchen Clara was no longer permitted to eat in. Their eyes met briefly, carrying volumes of compassion that neither dared speak aloud. The library had become Clara's sanctuary, the one room Lady Constance rarely entered. Her stepmother had no use for books, considering them a waste of time better spent husband hunting. Clara ran her fingers along the leather spines, drawing comfort from their familiar presence. Her father's collection. Her education, conducted in stolen moments between chores. She had just settled into the window seat with a volume of Byron when the sound of carriage wheels on gravel shattered the morning's quiet. Clara's heart plummeted. She wasn't supposed to be here. She should hide, disappear like the ghost her stepmother wished her to be. The library door opened. A man stood in the threshold, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in the unmistakable elegance of London tailoring. Dark hair touched with silver at the temples framed a face that might have been carved from marble, save for the intelligence burning in gray eyes that swept the room with predatory precision. "I beg your pardon," he said, his voice deep and cultured. "I was told this room housed an impressive collection of first editions." Clara stood quickly, the book tumbling from her lap. Her mind raced. He thought she was a servant. No, better. A governess, perhaps. The gray dress, her severe appearance, the book in her hands. Let him think it. Let him think anything but the truth, which was too humiliating to bear. "It does, sir. Lord Ashford was a great collector." She bent to retrieve the fallen volume, acutely conscious of her worn dress, her chapped hands. Lord Ashford? The man stepped closer, interest flickering across his features. I knew him some years ago. A man of excellent taste. His gaze fell to the book she clutched. Byron. She walks in beauty, like the night. Of cloudless climes and starry skies. Clara continued without thinking. And all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. You read for pleasure, then, not merely to teach. I read because I must, Clara said, honesty escaping before prudence could cage it. Because books are windows to worlds where justice exists, where goodness is rewarded, where... She stopped, horrified at her own confession. But he was smiling now, a real smile that transformed his austere features into something approaching warmth. Where heroines find their happy endings? Something like that. He extended his hand. Alexander Tremaine. Clara stared at the offered hand, torn between propriety and longing. When was the last time someone had treated her as an equal? She placed her rough palm in his smooth one. Clara? Just Clara? For now, yes. He was about to speak again when the library door burst open with the force of a winter storm. Lady Constance stood framed in the doorway, Lavinia and Dorothea flanking her like pastel sentries. Her face had gone crimson, then white, cycling through shades of fury like a bruised sky before a tempest. Your Grace! She swept into a curtsy so deep it was nearly prostrate. What an unexpected honor! I had no idea you would be touring the house. I would have provided a proper guide. Your Grace. The word struck Clara like a physical blow. A duke. She had been conversing freely with a duke, one of the highest peers in England, as though they were equals. Mortification flooded through her, hot and suffocating. Lady Constance. The warmth had vanished from his voice, replaced by aristocratic ice. I was admiring your late husband's library. This young woman was kind enough to discuss his collection with me. Young woman? Lady Constance's laugh was shrill, brittle. Your Grace, surely you jest. This is merely Clara, my late husband's daughter from his first marriage. She insists on remaining here, though heaven knows we could manage better without her constant demands on our charity. She turned to Clara, her expression venomous. Clara, His Grace, the Duke of Ashbourne, honors us with his presence. You will serve refreshments in the drawing room. Immediately. The words landed like blows. My late husband's daughter. Not stepdaughter. Not even ward. Just a burden. A charity case. Something less than the servants who at least earned their keep. Clara curtsied, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor. She could feel his gaze on her, heavy with questions she could never answer. Of course, Lady Constance. Come, Your Grace, Lady Constance trilled, already herding him toward the door. Allow me to present my daughters, the true mistresses of Hartfield. Lavinia and Dorothea have been so looking forward to making your acquaintance. They are both accomplished on the pianoforte, and Lavinia's watercolors have been much admired in London. The voices faded down the corridor, leaving Clara alone among the books that had been her only friends. She pressed her palms against her burning cheeks. A duke. She had quoted poetry to a duke, discussed literature as though she had the right, as though she were still Clara Ashford, beloved daughter of Hartfield Manor, instead of the hidden, unwanted ghost she had become. Through the window, she watched the Duke of Ashbourne's carriage standing in the drive, his crest gleaming gold in the morning sun. Watched, and knew with absolute certainty that her stepmother would ensure they never spoke again. What Clara did not see, could not see from her position, was Alexander Tremaine's face as he settled into the drawing room, accepting tea from trembling Lavinia, while Dorothea simpered over embroidery. could not see the way his jaw tightened as he observed the opulent furnishings, the expensive gowns, the jewelry dripping from Lady Constance's throat and wrists, and contrasted them with Clara's threadbare dress, her raw hands, the hunger he had glimpsed in those remarkable green eyes. Could not see him watching through the drawing-room door as Clara, the true daughter of this house, the rightful heiress, carried the tea tray like a servant, her spine straight despite the weight of humiliation pressing down upon her. Could not see the moment he decided, with the cold precision that had made him one of England's most formidable peers, that Lady Constance had made a grave error. The Duke of Ashbourne did not forget injustice, and he had just witnessed a crime far worse than theft. He had witnessed the breaking of a spirit, or rather, the attempt to break it. For as Clara set down the tea service and retreated with quiet dignity, Alexander saw what her stepmother could not: the steel beneath the surface, the unquenched fire in eyes that had not yet surrendered hope. He would return to Hartfield Manor, and when he did, he would bring the full weight of his title, his fortune, and his fury. Lady Constance had hidden the wrong woman from him. Alexander Tremaine did not make impulsive decisions. 31 years of navigating society's treacherous waters, of managing vast estates and wielding political influence, had taught him the value of patience and precision. Yet 3 days after leaving Hartfield Manor, he found himself in his London study with his cousin, Edmund Fairfax, demanding answers with an urgency that surprised them both. "The Ashford estate," Edmund said, shuffling through documents with the methodical care of a gifted solicitor, "is held in trust for Miss Clara Ashford until she reaches 25. Lady Constance, as the widow, administers the property during the interim." He looked up, his sharp blue eyes narrowing. "Why this sudden interest, Alexander? You've refused dozens of estate acquisition opportunities this year alone." "I am not interested in acquiring it." Alexander stood at the window, watching London's grey streets without seeing them. "I am interested in ensuring it is being properly managed." "Ah." Edmund's expression shifted to something knowing and faintly amused. "This wouldn't have anything to do with a young woman, would it?" Alexander's silence was answer enough. "Very well, I'll make inquiries. Discreetly." Edmund gathered his papers. "Though I must say, this is unlike you. Since Caroline Weatherby—" "Do not speak that name." The words emerged harsh, final. Caroline, who had simulated affection so perfectly, who had wanted only his title and had nearly succeeded in trapping him into a loveless marriage before her deception was revealed. That betrayal had turned him cynical, wary, convinced that genuine connection was impossible in their artificial world of strategic alliances and mercenary matches. Until a woman in a grey dress had quoted Byron with passion in her voice and intelligence in her eyes, unaware of his rank, wanting nothing from him but conversation. Edmund departed, leaving Alexander with his thoughts and a growing conviction that Clara Ashford's situation was far worse than a mere lack of social opportunity. He was proven correct 4 days later when Edmund returned with ledgers that told a damning story. £15,000, Edmund said quietly, spreading the evidence across the mahogany desk. "Withdrawn over the past 2 years for household expenses and improvements." "Alexander, I visited Hartfield. There are no improvements. The tenant cottages are in disrepair. The fields are poorly managed, and the house itself, while opulent in the family quarters, shows neglect elsewhere." He paused. "The servants speak carefully, but I gathered enough. Miss Ashford is treated as unpaid labor. She works from dawn until dark, is given the smallest room in the attics, and is deliberately kept from society." Alexander's hands clenched into fists on the desk. "Can we prove embezzlement?" "With an audit, yes. But removing Lady Constance as trustee will require legal proceedings. It could take months." "Then we begin immediately." Alexander stood. And in the meantime, I returned to Hartfield. Alexander. Edmund's voice carried warning. If you pursue this young woman, society will question your motives. They will say you are taking advantage of a desperate situation. Let them say what they wish. Alexander was already reaching for his coat. I have never cared for society's opinion before. I will not start now. The sun was setting when Alexander arrived at Hartfield Manor 3 days later, unannounced and determined. The butler's eyes widened in recognition, and something else. Was it relief? Your Grace, we were not expecting— Where is Miss Ashford? The butler hesitated, decades of training warring with something that looked like conscience. Finally, he gestured toward the east wing. The stables, Your Grace. Lady Constance has her mucking out the horses. Fury, white-hot and absolute, flooded through Alexander. He strode through the house and out to the stable yard, where he found Clara in the golden light of late afternoon, her gray dress streaked with dirt, her hair escaping its pins, carrying a bucket of water that was clearly too heavy for her slender frame. She looked up at the sound of his boots on the cobblestones. For a moment, shock rendered her motionless. Then color flooded her pale cheeks, and she set down the bucket with shaking hands. Your Grace. The words were barely audible. I did not know. I am not fit to receive. You are fit to receive whatever respect you are owed as the mistress of this estate. He closed the distance between them, taking in her exhausted face, the bruise on her wrist. Recent, he noted with escalating rage, and the way she stood despite her obvious fatigue. Why are you doing this work? Because Lady Constance requires it. Clara lifted her chin with that pride he had witnessed before. And because this is still my home, Your Grace, in whatever capacity I am permitted to remain in it. It is your home by right of birth and inheritance. A right I cannot exercise for 2 more years. A right that is being violated daily. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to her. Your stepmother is embezzling your inheritance, Miss Ashford. My cousin is gathering evidence as we speak. The handkerchief fluttered from her nerveless fingers. What? £15,000 at minimum. Stolen from the estate that should be funding your future, not her daughter's. Wardrobes. He watched emotions cascade across her face. Shock, hope, fear. I intend to expose her crimes and restore you to your rightful position. Why? The word emerged as barely more than a whisper. Why would you do this for me? Because you made me believe again. Because you saw me as a man, not a title. Because your spirit refuses to break despite every cruelty inflicted upon it. Because it is just, he said instead. And because I have the power to act where you cannot. Tears welled in her eyes, the first crack in her careful composure. Your Grace, if she discovers that we have spoken, then let her discover it. He bent to retrieve the fallen handkerchief, pressing it back into her hand. I am calling upon this household tomorrow evening, Miss Ashford, and I expect to see you at dinner, not as a servant, as the daughter of the house. She will never allow it. She will have no choice. His voice carried the absolute authority of a man accustomed to obedience. I am bringing witnesses, neighbors of good standing. Lady Constance will not dare refuse such a public gathering. Clara stared at him, hope and terror warring in her expression. You are turning my world upside down, Your Grace. Good. It was already inverted beyond all recognition. He bowed, formal and correct. Until tomorrow evening, Miss Ashford. He left her standing in the stable yard, clutching his handkerchief like a talisman. The next evening arrived with the weight of approaching thunderstorms, atmospheric and metaphorical. Alexander arrived precisely at 7, with Lord and Lady Pemberton and Sir Marcus Weatherly in his party. All were respectable neighbors. all curious about the Duke of Ashburn's sudden interest in Hartfield Manor. Lady Constance greeted them in the drawing room with frantic cheerfulness, her daughters arranged like ornamental vases on either side of her. Alexander noted the absence he had anticipated and attacked immediately. "Lady Constance, we are missing a member of the party, are we not? Where is Miss Ashford?" The room fell silent. Lady Constance's smile became rigid. "Miss Ashford is indisposed this evening, Your Grace. She suffers from such delicate nerves." "Indeed? How curious. I found her in excellent health yesterday." He let the words hang, watching comprehension dawn on the faces of the other guests. Lady Pemberton's eyebrows rose significantly. "I must insist on her presence. After all, she is the daughter of our late friend Lord Ashford. It would be unconscionable to dine in his home without her. Your Grace, I really must protest. And I must insist." The steel in his voice could have cut glass. "Mrs. Pemberton, you were acquainted with the late Lady Ashford, were you not? And her daughter?" "I was." Lady Pemberton's gaze sharpened with understanding. "Such a delightful child. I have wondered why we have seen so little of her since her father's passing." The trap closed. Lady Constance, cornered by social pressure and the inexorable will of a duke, had no choice but to summon Clara. She arrived 15 minutes later, wearing a dress that had once been fine but was now years out of fashion and slightly too large, as though she had lost weight since last wearing it. Her hair was arranged simply, and she wore no jewelry. Yet she moved into the room with a grace that her stepsister's expensive gowns could not purchase, curtsying to each guest with impeccable manners. Alexander watched Lady Pemberton's expression transform from curiosity to shock to outrage as she took in Clara's appearance and compared it to the ostentatious display of the stepsisters. At dinner, Alexander orchestrated the conversation with surgical precision. He asked Clara about her father's library, drawing her into a discussion of literature that showcased her education and intelligence. He inquired about the estate's history, allowing her to demonstrate her intimate knowledge of Hartfield's lands and people. He encouraged her to share memories of her parents, painting a picture of a beloved daughter deliberately erased. Lavinia attempted to interject with a vapid comment about a ball. Dorothea simpered over a recent bonnet purchase. Their contributions only emphasized the chasm between superficiality and substance. And then Lady Constance, pushed beyond endurance by watching her stepdaughter receive the attention that should have gone to her daughters, made her fatal error. "Really, Clara," she said with vicious sweetness, "you speak as though this were still your father's house. But we all know the truth, don't we? You remain here on my charity, eating food I provide, wearing dresses I permit you to keep. Perhaps you should show more gratitude and less presumption." The table froze. Sir Marcus set down his wineglass with an audible clink. Alexander leaned back in his chair, his expression glacial. "How fascinating, Lady Constance. Because according to the documents I have reviewed, this is not your house at all. It is Miss Ashford's inheritance, held in trust until she reaches her majority. You are merely the administrator, a position that carries significant legal responsibilities." "Your Grace, I assure you." "Responsibilities that include maintaining the property, managing funds appropriately, and ensuring the well-being of the heir." He paused, letting each word land with devastating precision. "Tell me, have the tenant cottages been repaired this year? Have the promised improvements to the drainage systems been completed? And where, precisely, have the £15,000 withdrawn for household expenses been allocated?" Lady Constance's face drained of color. "Because," Alexander continued, "my solicitor is conducting a thorough audit of Hartfield's accounts, and preliminary findings suggest significant discrepancies." "How dare you!" Lady Constance shot to her feet, her voice shrill with panic. "This is my home. You have no right." "I have every right to question financial impropriety, madam," as does any peer of the realm concerned with justice. He stood as well, towering over her. But more than that, I have the obligation to speak when I witness the abuse of a young woman who should be treated as the honored daughter of this house, not as unpaid labor. Abuse? I have clothed her, housed her. In a servant's attic room while her stepsisters occupy the family quarters. You have dressed her in rags while purchasing London wardrobes for your daughters with her inheritance. You have isolated her from society, denied her opportunities, and systematically attempted to erase her very existence. His voice dropped to a lethal calm. That, Lady Constance, is not charity. It is cruelty. Lady Pemberton rose. Your Grace speaks the truth. Lady Constance, I am appalled. Utterly appalled. Come, my lord. We shall take our leave. Sir Marcus stood as well, his expression thunderous. Disgraceful. Simply disgraceful. The guests departed, leaving Alexander standing across the table from a trembling Lady Constance, with Clara frozen in her chair, tears streaming silently down her face. You will regret this, Lady Constance hissed. Both of you. No, madam. You will regret every cruelty you have inflicted. Alexander moved to Clara's side, offering his hand. Miss Ashford, I believe you have had quite enough of this evening. Allow me to escort you to your room. Clara took his hand. It was trembling, and allowed him to lead her from the dining room. In the corridor, away from prying eyes, her composure finally shattered. Your Grace, what have you done? She will make my life unbearable. She will do nothing. He turned to face her, still holding her hand. Tomorrow, Edmund arrives with a magistrate and constables. We have evidence of financial malfeasance, and we will have testimony from servants who have witnessed your treatment. Lady Constance will be removed as trustee. And then what? Where do I go? You remain here, in your home, with proper staff and protection. He hesitated, then allowed himself a small truth. And if you would permit it, with a friend who very much wishes to know you better. She looked up at him, hope kindling in those extraordinary eyes. A friend? Perhaps in time, something more. He released her hand reluctantly. But first, we free you from this cage. True to his word, Alexander returned the next morning with Edmund, a magistrate, and 2 constables. The investigation took 3 hours. By noon, Lady Constance had been formally stripped of her trusteeship, charged with embezzlement, and given 1 week to remove herself and her daughters from the premises. Clara stood in the entrance hall of Hartfield Manor, her manor, truly hers now, and watched her stepmother's carriage depart with a mixture of disbelief and liberation that left her dizzy. Miss Ashford, Edmund said gently, we have arranged for a temporary administrator to help you manage the estate until you turn 25, and His Grace has taken the liberty of hiring additional staff. With your permission, of course. Of course, she echoed faintly. Alexander stepped forward. You are free, Clara. Truly free. She turned to him. This man who had upended her entire existence in the space of a week, and felt something shift in her chest. Something that felt dangerously like love. Thank you, she whispered. I have no words for what you have done. Then do not speak. He smiled, and it transformed his severe features into something breathtaking. Simply accept my invitation to visit London in 3 weeks' time. There is a great deal of society you have missed, and I would very much like to be your guide to it. London? She looked down at her shabby dress. Your Grace, I have nothing suitable. You have everything suitable. You have intelligence, grace, courage, and an indomitable spirit. His voice softened. The rest is merely decoration, and that can be easily arranged. Say yes, Clara. She met his eyes and saw there something she had thought she would never receive, genuine regard, untainted by obligation or pity. Yes, Excellent. He bowed formally, but his eyes held warmth. Until London, then. As his carriage rolled down the drive, Mrs. Holloway appeared at Clara's side, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Oh, Miss Clara, your father would be so proud. Clara watched the dust settle on the road, her heart simultaneously lighter and more terrified than it had ever been. She was free. And the Duke of Ashbourne, brilliant, powerful, impossibly kind, had looked at her as though she were something precious. What happened next would determine whether her story was truly the beginning of a fairy tale or merely the end of a nightmare. She hoped, for the first time in years, that she might deserve to find out. 3 weeks could be an eternity or an instant, depending on whether one was dreading or anticipating what they contained. For Clara, they were both. Hartfield Manor transformed under her touch, or rather, under the direction of Mrs. Holloway, now properly installed as housekeeper with a staff that actually respected the name Ashford. The tenant cottages received their long overdue repairs. The fields were properly assessed and replanted. And Clara, emerging from her attic prison, took up residence in her childhood bedroom with its view of the rose gardens her mother had planted. But the greatest transformation was Clara herself. A London modiste arrived with an entourage and letters of introduction from the Duke of Ashbourne. Within days, Clara possessed a wardrobe that would have made even Lavinia weep with envy. And yet, when she looked in the mirror now, she did not see expensive fabric or fashionable cuts. She saw herself, truly saw herself, for the first time in years. Her face had regained color with proper meals. Her hair, when dressed by a skilled maid, revealed its natural luster. And her eyes, those green eyes that had held such quiet desperation, now sparkled with something dangerous. Hope. The invitation arrived written in Alexander's own hand, not dictated to a secretary. Would she do him the honor of staying at Ashbourne House during her visit to London? His aunt, the Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne, would serve as chaperone, of course. All proprieties would be observed. Clara held the letter against her heart and allowed herself a smile. London in early summer was a revelation. The city pulsed with life, with elegance, with a sophistication that both intimidated and exhilarated her. But it was Ashbourne House that stole her breath. A Palladian masterpiece in Mayfair, all classical proportions and understated magnificence that spoke of power so absolute it required no ostentation. The Dowager Duchess proved to be a silver-haired woman with Alexander's gray eyes and a perception that missed nothing. She embraced Clara warmly, then held her at arm's length for examination. "My nephew has excellent taste," she declared. "Welcome, my dear. Now we have 3 weeks to prepare you for your debut into society. And I promise you, it will be nothing like that travesty your stepmother would have orchestrated." Alexander arrived that evening for dinner, and Clara descended the grand staircase in a gown of pale green silk that made her eyes luminous. She watched him see her, truly see her, in proper dress and setting, and the admiration that flickered across his face made her pulse race. "Miss Ashford." He bowed over her hand, his lips barely grazing her gloved knuckles. "You are radiant." "Thanks to your generosity, Your Grace." "No." His voice lowered, intimate. "Thanks to your own courage. I merely removed the obstacles." The days that followed unfolded like a dream Clara had long ago stopped allowing herself to imagine. The Dowager Duchess introduced her to society with impeccable strategy, positioning Clara not as a charity case but as the rightful heiress of Hartfield Manor, who had been in mourning for her father. The Tun, ever hungry for new blood and drama, embraced her story with enthusiasm, particularly when it became clear that the Duke of Ashbourne was paying her marked attention. They walked in Hyde Park at the fashionable hour, his arms supporting hers as they navigated pathways filled with curious eyes. They attended the opera, where she sat in the Ashbourne box with the Dowager Duchess while he explained the intricacies of the performance. They dined at intimate gatherings where Clara discovered that she could hold her own in conversation with diplomats, scholars, and social luminaries. Her years of secret education in her father's library had prepared her better than any finishing school. But it was the quiet moments Clara treasured most. Mornings in Ashbourne House's magnificent library, where Alexander would find her reading and simply sit nearby, working on correspondence, their silence comfortable and companionable. Evenings in the music room, where she played the pianoforte while he listened with an attention that made her fingers tremble on the keys. "Why did you never marry?" she asked him one evening, the question escaping before prudence could stop it. They were alone save for the Dowager Duchess dozing in her chair by the fire. Propriety observed, but privacy granted. Alexander stood at the window, looking out at the twilit square. "I was betrayed," he said finally. 5 years ago, by a woman who simulated affection perfectly. She wanted my title, my fortune, my position, everything except me. He turned to face her. It taught me to trust surface beauty and practice charm never again. I became convinced that genuine connection was impossible in our world of strategic alliances. And now? Clara's heart beat so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "Now I know better." He crossed to her, his gray eyes intense. "Because I met a woman in a threadbare dress who quoted poetry for the love of words, not to impress. Who maintained her dignity in circumstances that would have broken lesser spirits. Who asked nothing of me but conversation." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm through the thin glove. "You restored my faith, Clara. You reminded me that nobility has nothing to do with titles." Alexander. His name, used for the first time, felt like intimacy. "I am terrified." "Of what?" "That this is temporary. That I will wake up back in that attic room, and this will have been a dream born of desperation." He raised her hand to his lips, kissing it firmly this time, deliberately. "Then I shall have to convince you of the reality. Repeatedly. For the rest of our lives, if necessary." The Pemberton ball arrived like a culmination and a beginning. Clara stood at the entrance to the ballroom wearing a gown of midnight blue silk that made her look like a young queen, diamonds borrowed from the Dowager Duchess glittering at her throat and ears. The entire ton was present, every eye turning as she was announced. Miss Clara Ashford of Hartfield Manor. Alexander waited at the bottom of the stairs, resplendent in black evening dress, his hand extended. The message was unmistakable. The Duke of Ashbourne was publicly claiming this woman as his choice. The whispers were immediate and delighted. Clara took his hand, descended, and allowed him to lead her directly to the dance floor as the orchestra struck up a waltz. "You are causing a scandal," she murmured as he swept her into the dance. "Good." His hand was firm at her waist, guiding her through steps she had practiced with the Dowager Duchess. "Let them talk. Let them see that I have chosen the most remarkable woman in this room, possibly in all of England, and that I intend to make my preference publicly and irrevocably clear." "Alexander, you barely know me." "I know everything that matters." They turned in perfect synchronization, the crowd a blur around them. "I know your courage, your intelligence, your capacity for forgiveness. I know that you value books over jewels, substance over pretense, truth over artifice. I know that you have suffered injustice and emerged stronger rather than bitter." He pulled her infinitesimally closer. Scandal be damned. "And I know that I have never felt more certain of anything in my life than I am of this. You are meant to be mine, and I am meant to be yours." The music swelled. The room spun. And Clara, who had spent years invisible and ignored, felt seen in a way that transcended mere visibility. She felt cherished. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to whatever you are asking." "Everything," he said. "I am asking for everything." The ball continued around them. Congratulations, knowing smiles, the Dowager Duchess beaming triumphantly. But Alexander did not relinquish Clara's company. He danced with her 3 times, a declaration in itself. He introduced her to his closest friends and political allies as though she were already his duchess. And when the evening finally ended, he escorted her to the Ashbourne carriage with an intensity that promised this was merely prelude. 2 days later, he called upon her formally and requested a walk in the gardens behind Ashbourne House. It was evening, the golden hour when shadows lengthened and light turned everything to honey and amber. The roses were in full bloom, their fragrance heavy and sweet. A fountain splashed in the center of the formal garden, and it was there that Alexander led her, away from the windows, away from curious eyes. "Clara?" He stopped, turning to face her. "I have something to ask you, and I find myself uncharacteristically nervous about your answer." She tilted her head, studying this powerful man who suddenly looked almost vulnerable. "You? Nervous?" "Terrified, actually." He took both her hands in his. "Because what I am about to do goes against every convention of courtship, every strategic consideration, every piece of advice I have ever received about maintaining dignified reserve." "What are you going to do?" And then, impossibly, the Duke of Ashbourne, one of the most powerful men in England, knelt before her on the garden path. Clara's breath caught. The world seemed to still, the fountain's splash fading to background music for this singular moment. "I am going to ask you to marry me," Alexander said, looking up at her with those gray eyes that had seen through her disguise from the very first moment. "Not because it is strategic, though uniting Hartfield with Ashbourne would be advantageous. Not because it is expected, though society certainly anticipates it by now, but because in the space of a few weeks, you have become essential to me in a way I cannot adequately explain." Tears pricked Clara's eyes. "Alexander." "Let me finish." His grip on her hands tightened. "You asked me why I never married. The truth is, I believed love was a fiction, a pretty lie told to justify mercenary alliances. I thought passion was temporary and genuine affection impossible in our world of masks and performances." He smiled, and it was beautiful. "Then you proved me catastrophically wrong. I didn't do anything. You were yourself. Completely, courageously yourself, even when everything around you tried to crush that self into submission." He released one hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You taught me that true nobility has nothing to do with titles, that strength is not always loud, that beauty is meaningless without substance. You restored my faith in humanity when I had lost it entirely." "You saved me," Clara whispered. "You gave me back my life." "No, my darling. You saved yourself by refusing to surrender your dignity. I merely removed the obstacles." He reached into his coat and withdrew a ring, an emerald surrounded by diamonds, ancient and exquisite. "This was my grandmother's. The Dowager Duchess insisted I bring it tonight. She claims she knew from the moment she met you that you were meant to wear it." Clara stared at the ring, at this man kneeling in the garden, at the impossible reality of this moment. "I am still afraid," she admitted. "Afraid that I am not enough, that I will disappoint you." "Clara Ashford." His voice was firm, brooking no argument. "You are the most remarkable woman I have ever encountered. You survived years of systematic cruelty without losing your kindness. You educated yourself in secret and maintained hope when you had every reason to despair. You walk into ballrooms with the bearing of a queen, and you quote Byron in libraries with the passion of a poet." He held up the ring. "You are not just enough. You are everything." "So I ask you," here in this garden with no witnesses save the roses and the stars. Will you marry me? Will you be my duchess? My partner? My love? The question hung between them, weighted with promise and possibility. Clara looked at him, really looked at him, saw the vulnerability beneath the aristocratic reserve, the hope tempering the confidence, the love shining in eyes that had been cynical before she stumbled into his world. Yes. The word emerged strong and clear, no hesitation. Yes, Alexander, I will marry you. He stood in one fluid motion, sliding the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms. The kiss was everything their careful courtship had promised, passionate but tender, claiming but cherishing. Clara melted into him, her hands fisting in his coat, tasting joy and freedom and home all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. I have one more thing to confess. What? I am hopelessly, devastatingly in love with you. I have been since you quoted poetry at me in that library, looking like a disheveled angel who had no idea she was speaking to a duke. Clara laughed, the sound bright and unfettered, so different from the careful silence she had maintained for years. I am hopelessly in love with you too, even though you are imperious and overprotective and entirely too accustomed to having your way. I promise to use those qualities only in your service from now on. I'm going to hold you to that. He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring. The garden darkened around them, the first stars appearing overhead. And Clara, who had spent so long hidden and diminished, felt herself expand into the fullness of who she was meant to be, not despite her suffering, but strengthened by it. They returned to the house hand in hand, the ring glittering on Clara's finger, to find the Dowager Duchess waiting with champagne and knowing smiles. It took you long enough, the elderly woman said tartly, though her eyes were bright with tears. I was beginning to think I would have to orchestrate a more dramatic intervention. Aunt Margaret, your subtlety is overwhelming, Alexander said dryly, but he was smiling. Subtlety is overrated. Clara, my dear, welcome to the family. Officially. She embraced Clara warmly. You are exactly what this stubborn man needed. Someone with enough spine to stand up to him, and enough heart to make him remember he has one. The wedding was planned for early autumn, enough time for Clara to properly prepare, but not so long that London's gossips could manufacture drama. Alexander chafed at the delay, but the Dowager Duchess was immovable. You will do this correctly, she insisted. Clara deserves a wedding that announces her place in society, not a hasty affair that invites speculation. The months between engagement and marriage passed in a blur of activity. Clara divided her time between Hartfield and London, learning to manage her restored estate while preparing for her new role as Duchess of Ashburn. Mrs. Holloway wept with joy when Clara showed her the ring and insisted on organizing the Hartfield staff for the most spectacular wedding breakfast the county had ever seen. And then, one perfect September day, Clara Ashford became Clara Tremaine, Duchess of Ashbourne, in a ceremony at St. George's, Hanover Square that drew every notable family in England. She walked down the aisle on Edmund Fairfax's arm, the cousin who had helped save her, now proudly giving her away. Wearing a gown of ivory silk embroidered with seed pearls that caught the light like captured stars. The church was filled with roses, their fragrance mingling with incense and candle wax. And at the altar stood Alexander, resplendent in formal dress, his eyes never leaving her face as she approached. The vows were traditional, but the emotion beneath them was anything but conventional. When Alexander slipped the wedding band onto her finger next to her engagement ring, his hands trembled slightly. When Clara promised to love and honor him, her voice rang clear and strong through the ancient church. And when the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander kissed her with a passion that scandalized the older guests and delighted the younger ones. A public declaration that this was no marriage of convenience but a union of genuine devotion. The wedding breakfast at Ashbourne House was magnificent. Clara, now a duchess, moved through rooms filled with people who had once ignored her existence, her head high and her hand secure in her husband's. She saw Lady Pemberton dabbing at tears and Sir Marcus raising his glass in enthusiastic toast. She received congratulations from viscountesses and marchionesses, and even a minor princess who declared the match utterly romantic. But the moment that mattered most came late in the evening, when she and Alexander finally escaped to his private study, their study now, and closed the door on the celebration. "Hello, wife," Alexander said, pulling her into his arms. "Hello, husband." Clara smiled up at him, still marveling at the reality of those words. "Regrets?" "Not a single one." She touched his face, tracing the lines around his eyes, the silver at his temples, committing every detail to memory. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me when I was invisible. For fighting for me when I had given up fighting for myself. For loving me when I believed I was unlovable." "Clara." His voice roughened with emotion. "You were never unlovable. You were a diamond hidden in darkness, and I merely brought you into the light where you always belonged." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I am the one who should be grateful. You gave me back something I thought I had lost forever. Hope. Faith. The belief that real love is possible." They stood together in the study as the sounds of celebration drifted from the ballroom. Two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed: recognition, respect, and a love that transformed them both. 6 months later, on a spring morning that smelled of rain and new growth, Clara stood in the gardens of Hartfield Manor and felt life stir beneath her hand. She was 4 months pregnant, her body changing with the promise of the future. Alexander was in London on parliamentary business, expected to return that afternoon, and she had news to share that would make him insufferably pleased with himself. But for now, she was alone with the roses her mother had planted, the house her father had loved, and the profound contentment of knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Mrs. Holloway emerged from the house, calling about afternoon tea. The tenants' children played in the meadow beyond the formal gardens, their laughter carrying on the breeze. And in the distance, Clara heard the sound of carriage wheels on the drive. Alexander, arriving early, unable to stay away. She smiled, one hand on her growing belly, the other shading her eyes as she watched her husband's carriage approach. The girl who had scrubbed pots in this very house, who had hidden in the library to escape cruelty, who had been told she was worthless. That girl was gone, transformed not by wealth or title, but by love and recognition, and the unwavering belief that she deserved better. Alexander leaped from the carriage before it fully stopped, striding toward her with an expression of such joy that Clara's heart expanded almost painfully. "I couldn't wait," he said, reaching her and pulling her close. 3 days was an eternity. 3 days was 2 days ago, Clara laughed. "You were supposed to be gone a week." I delegated, ruthlessly and without remorse. He kissed her thoroughly, then pulled back to study her face. "You look radiant. What are you not telling me?" She took his hand and placed it over her belly, watching his expression transform from curiosity to wonder to fierce protectiveness in the space of a heartbeat. "We're having a baby," she said simply. "An heir. Or an heiress. Either way, someone who will grow up knowing they are loved and valued and seen." Alexander's eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. "A baby. Clara, my darling, brilliant wife. A baby." "Yes." She leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. Our happy ending is just beginning. And there, in the gardens where her mother had once walked, in the home her father had built, Clara Tremaine, Duchess of Ashburn, formerly the hidden daughter no one wanted, found the peace that had eluded her for so long. She had been invisible. Now she was cherished. She had been dismissed. Now she was celebrated. She had been told she was nothing. Now she knew her worth. And most importantly, she had found a love that saw past appearances to the truth beneath. A love that recognized her value when the world had declared her worthless, that fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself, that transformed both their lives in the process. The Duke had been searching for something real in a world of artifice. And in the hidden daughter, kept deliberately out of sight, he had found not just love, but redemption. Proof that beneath society's shallow surface, genuine connection was still possible. They stood together in the garden as afternoon faded to evening. Two souls who had found each other against impossible odds, their future stretching before them bright with promise. And if sometimes Clara still woke in the night, disoriented, expecting to find herself back in that attic room, Alexander was there to pull her close and whisper the truth against her hair. You are safe. You are loved. You are home. She always believed him, because unlike every other person in her life, he had never given her reason to doubt. The hidden daughter had been found, and in being found, she had discovered not just a husband, but a partner, not just a home, but a sanctuary, not just survival, but joy. It was, in every sense that mattered, a happy ending, and an even happier beginning.